All right, welcome back to Sophie Watches Movies. The podcast, not the movie yet. The podcast where we have created a list of 128 of the internet's favorite movies, ranked them randomly, seeded them, and created a bracket so we can hopefully one day in 20 years determine what is the greatest movie according to the internet by the time plenty of great movies have already come out to top all of these. Okay, as always, I'm Jaden Bickle.
I'm Kennedy Grant.
Hello, Math.
And this is Sophie.
Not a lot to say today from Sophie. That's okay. I'm sure she'll speak up when she's ready. So this week we looked at Halloween and City of God. So Halloween was our lower seed. I think this is an interesting matchup, but we'll get a little bit into that later. Start by talking about Halloween. This was seeded 75. This was a tour pick for John Carpenter. A tour, of course, being the theory in which a director is the artist of a movie. Last week we talked a little bit about that if you want to go back and look with regards to Martin Scorsese. But this week we're doing John Carpenter with Halloween. So this was his third feature-length film, coming a few years after Assault on Precinct 13. How do you guys, I guess that's a good place to start. What's your experience with this movie, and how do you feel about this as maybe the most John Carpenter movie?
I watched this really young, and of course, growing up, really in America, if you're exposed to horror movies at all, you get exposed to Halloween one way or another. There's too many sequels and too much pop culture for you to avoid it, really.
I just blanked. Pretty much sums up how I feel about this movie. No, my experience with this film, my only memory of this film is the ending. So this is actually my first time rewatching an actual Halloween movie that isn't by Rob Zombie.
Oh. So what do you think comparatively?
I think the original is actually pretty fine as it is, like especially with the time period it came out, like probably was like super scary. And I think what Rob Zombie did, it worked really well with the original by comparison. Like it's more expansion of what happened in between scenes, like what led up to Michael killing his sister, and then what happened in the actual insane asylum. Was that where he was?
Right. I think there's some argument to apply to it that the mystery of him made him scarier than like the established backstory. Mm-hmm. But that's just my personal preference.
I can see that, but I also like with the more iterations of Michael Myers that come, every time he seems to be taller and more jacked, while in the original he's just some dude of average build.
The canon continuality is absolutely wild.
Especially considering how much John Carpenter did not want this to be more than one movie.
He was like, no, there's nothing here. It's literally just a guy in a mask being hunted.
Yeah.
And hunting. That's it. And I appreciate him for that.
Yeah, I mean, you get a little bit of Loomis being like, he's the actual incarnation of evil, but not much more than that. I mean, you get a little bit of that with him walking away from being shot 6 times, or however many times he gets shot at the end there. But yeah, not a lot of backstory on Michael, which I wonder if the influence of this movie subsequently influenced the later movies in this to give him more backstory, because you get someone like Jason Voorhees and you understand who Jason Voorhees is, where he came from, and why he's doing what he's doing, because he has mommy issues, of course. We don't really get any of that from Michael Myers in this first movie as far as what his motivation is, beyond Loomis saying he just has those dead eyes.
I firmly believe that if you're going to leave open-ended questions in your media, you're going to invite fan fiction. And that's just what happens.
That's fair.
Is that Rob Zombie writes a fan fiction of your story and it becomes ingrained into the lore.
Yeah. It is interesting. I feel like this is a hard one to kind of, at least when I would, and thinking about this movie, it's hard to parse out the original from all its sequels and especially all its influence. I mean, after you kind of said this, like at the time it was very scary. At the time, this changed horror movies. I mean, I think it's a really big testament to the influence this movie had, that by the time Halloween 2 came out, in between Halloween 1 and Halloween 2, there were 2 Friday the 13th movies that came out in theaters. Like, this movie came out, was incredibly successful, making over $70 million on a $300,000 budget, and really showed studios, oh, we can make these really low budget, nothing kind of horror movies and potentially make a huge profit off this. And suddenly, every studio that turned down this movie because they were like, this is nothing, this is silly and dumb, and who would watch this? All those studios suddenly turned around and are like, oh, there's a lot of money here. Let's make as many of these as possible.
Let's put Jamie Lee Curtis in them as often as we can.
As often as we can.
Which I think is the best strategy for having a movie be successful.
That does tend to be a good strategy. I was kind of thinking about like how to approach the influence of this, because I think looking ahead, and I don't want to spoil too much by saying this, but there are some horror movies in and around the 70s that we're going to talk about, 60s and 70s that we're going to talk about, that I think are all very influential. And I'm not really sure how much I want to get into that right now, when we could potentially get into it later. But yeah, definitely a very influential movie, changed the genre. A lot of studios eager to pick up after this.
My thinking about the original Halloween movie is its take on I forget, I know I saw it in a documentary about one of the not first case, but like one of the famous murders in American history, where essentially it was the cause of why people locked their doors from then on in. That was, I feel like Michael Myers has some elements of that. Like, that's supposed to be sort of where that's taking place, and the reason why it ended while it did is because anybody can essentially pick up the mask at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. If you look at the history of horror movies and like what scares people, you get into this really cool sort of like elaborate history of people, like outsiders, being scared, and that's why there's such a intricate tie between the queer community and horror, because originally horror was by and for us, by queer people, and then you get into, well, we can scare regular people too. We can scare suburbanites in their homes, and I think that this was particularly hard-hitting. If you look at I think The Exorcist too walks that same line, because you're like, oh, this is happening to upstanding, rich, relatively rich, white teenagers or young girls, even religious figures. That's what's scary, and I think that that's a really cool like getaway instead of just like the weird. And not that there's anything wrong with the weird, love the weird, but it allowed this whole expansion of horror as a genre, and I really like that.
Yeah, and I think when you kind of look at the difference between horror prior to and after Halloween, I think the suburbanness of it definitely hits something on, like, I think about Nightcrawler.
Right.
And, you know, his, Jake Gyllenhaal's character's drive to go into these higher end neighborhoods because people want to know what's happening right down the street from them. And even looking at like something like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which also very influential in this kind of subgenre of slasher that horror developed as a result of, I would say, more Halloween. But when you look at Texas Chainsaw Massacre, that's at some random field, you know, out in the middle of nowhere, Texas. This one is in the heart of the U.S., Midwest, Illinois.
Every town, USA.
Yeah, and they Carpenter and Deborah Hill, the co-screenwriter, they talked very much about how they wanted this to kind of feel like every small community has their little ghost story, their little horror story, and they wanted to recreate kind of that fear. Like, everybody has that one house that you look at and you're just like, nope, not going near that house, not touching that. I mean, even Stephen King has played with this in Derry a million times.
And Needful Things.
Yeah. Ton of stuff plays with. Every community has that one area you're just like, you don't go there. And this definitely plays into a lot of that fear.
Like, growing up in California, in in the place where I went to middle school, in walking distance, there was a very nice neighborhood, but there was this one building where everyone was like, you don't mess with that building.
Right.
Because, like, it looked fine. It was just, like, not run down, but, like, a little dusty. A couple windows cracked here and there, but...
There was some lore.
Yeah, there's a vibe to it. And I
Uh-huh.
remember, I think it was actually during Halloween or like, a couple days after it, where I just looked behind me after I walked past this building, and I looked up to the second story window, and I thought I saw a face move out from the distance. So I'm just like, I think someone's living there, or I don't know.
I mean, the likelihood that someone was living there is probably pretty high, given
Yeah.
the homeless rates, but also terrifying.
Yeah.
Just kind of like confirms all this story and folklore behind these buildings, and it just gets passed down. And I really like that. We like to tell stories like that, freak
Right.
ourselves out.
I think with that, kind of branching off from that, this movie's also really fascinating in how it maintains suspense. Because if you were just to sit down and describe this plot, it's some teenagers walk around, they go babysitting, boom, suddenly some guy's stabbing them. But you have to have that setup and establishment of who these characters are before you can start stabbing them.
Yeah, you got to care about the people being stabbed.
Which is something Halloween does better than most slasher movies, I would say, that subsequently follow.
I think that goes back to Jamie Lee Curtis too, because she's so engaging and she's so charismatic, and even when she's like being kind of rude, you're like, yeah, I'm genuinely voting for her in a way that I think set the standards for scream queens.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, I think John Carpenter does an incredible job of keeping that suspense, both with his music and how he frames a
yeah.
lot of shots. Yeah, he wrote this score in just 4 days, which is mind-boggling how talented he is with music. But
I didn't know that he had created the score, and that was something I also wanted to talk about, because it's just, even when she's just standing on the porch, like the unease that the score creates, and it's just masterful.
yeah, score does a lot of heavy lifting to keep you engaged in that first half when it's just teenagers
Naked.
not really doing a whole lot. Talking about teenager things.
I don't watch Euphoria. I'm not engaged in what the teenagers are up to.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of interesting. Because horror obviously was targeted by teens at this point, but I feel like Halloween understood teens better than most horror movies, both before it and after it, if that makes sense.
I think something really smart that he did in this too is you have the story of the teenagers going on, and that feels like one movie, and then you have the therapist and the sheriff chasing after the bad guy, which almost feels like another movie. And they get woven together really nicely, and that change in perspective is really helpful. But also, yeah, this is for the teenagers, but here's something a little more mature, and that adds a definite sense of danger where there might not have been before. You're like, an idiot teenager, all you have to do to get out of this situation is not be an idiot teenager. Done. Like, what am I going to do that a therapist and a sheriff can't?
Right, yeah, and it definitely helps builds Michael Myers up more.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because without that subplot of Loomis and the sheriff, it's just like, this weird guy in a William Shatner mask is stalking these teens around. That's creepy.
Right.
But, with this gauge of like, he stabbed his sister when he was just 6. He's been staring at a wall for 15 years, just waiting for this moment. That definitely
so
helps build a lot of tension.
I keep making eye contact with our stuffed Michael Myers in the corner. If you could call it eye contact. I'm glad he's watching over this procession.
As he should be.
When we were talking about the story being woven together for an A plot and a B plot, for a little bit, I had a thought of, that's the purpose of Anne, because since she's the daughter of the sheriff, but at the same time, I don't think the sheriff knows her daughter died.
I'm sure
Like-
it gets figured out eventually.
Yeah, eventually, but at the moment, like...
Yeah.
Well, yeah,
So
like,
I-
what are they going to do, text him?
I don't have many memories of Halloween 2. I actually watched it recently because it is
Yeah, I
October.
did too, and I still don't know.
I remember it being addressed. I do remember that being addressed in the sequel.
Okay.
Because the sequel picks up, like, the morning after. Which, John Carpenter famously wrote that sequel while incredibly drunk because he did not want to write it.
I love reluctant sequels. Be petty. Make it awful on purpose.
So yeah, I definitely think one of the greatest finds of this movie is kind of shifting topics. Jamie Lee Curtis is incredible. At the time, she was 19. This is her first feature-length movie. She was only paid $8,000 for it. For a little bit of context, she was there for all 20 days of this shoot. Don Pleasance, who played Loomis, was there for only 5 days and got paid $20,000.
Boo!
Wow.
He was a little bit more established at that time. Donald Pleasance was.
Yeah, I understand, but still.
But this was one of my more favorite trivia facts I found while looking into Halloween. Jamie Lee Curtis did get the honor of, in that opening scene, being the one who got to rub the fake blood off Sandy Johnson's bare chest because she did it the gentlest in between takes.
Oh,
Which, you know,
what an honor!
I'll take pay cut for that. But yeah, Jamie Lee Curtis was very anxious going into this movie. It was her first time. At the end of the first day, she got a call from John Carpenter, and she thought for sure she was going to get fired, but he actually just talked about how much he enjoyed working with her. It's also an interesting pick because so much of this movie, and John Carpenter and Deborah Hill are very honest about this in interviews, is influenced by Psycho. And Jamie Lee Curtis is, of course, Janet Leigh's daughter, who died in the shower in Psycho.
Oh.
So an interesting tie to Psycho. I'll be
Oh my
blunt, we will get into
gosh.
Psycho. So
Oh, yeah, I knew that. Psycho's kind of unavoidable
yeah.
as far as, like, establishing horror. Huh. I didn't know that. That's a really cool
Yeah.
little trivia fact. Oh, thank goodness she's a freaking star. Like, that could have been so bad. You're like, no, it's got to be, it's got to be this legacy. Oh, but she sucks. That would be awful.
Yeah, she wasn't the first casting choice. I don't remember who was, but I definitely an incredible find. Glad they landed on her. She was also the only actual teenager on set. She was 19 at the time. Everyone else was in their 20s besides the adult actors. Yeah, a lot of people, like, behind the scenes, a lot of young people at the start of their career just... Like, to listen to people talk about the making of this movie, it's like, yeah, we were just kind of a bunch of friends trying to put something together, and we weren't really sure if we had anything here. Which I think leaned itself really well. I think with also going off kind of the low budget, I don't think anyone hides low budget quite as well as John Carpenter.
I will agree, but I think that's half insult, too, because even when he has a really good budget, I can't tell.
That's fair. But I was just, like, watching this time, I was thinking about, so this movie was filmed in spring. And when you're watching it, all the trees, I didn't even notice until this time because I was paying more attention. All the trees in this movie are really green and vibrant because he's filming in spring in California. Mm-hmm. But you don't question for a second because there's leaves all over the ground that they spread themselves. And you don't even question that it's fall for a second. There's dead leaves all over the ground. Not a single ungreen tree. There's palm trees in the background of some scenes. They did their best to try and hide palm trees, but couldn't avoid it. Just like the fact that John Carpenter has that intelligence to be like, okay, this isn't going to look quite right, but if I angle the camera right, I can hide these palm trees. And if I just throw a bunch of leaves on the ground, and then they had like a fan going that they were throwing leaves up in front of the fan, so it looked like leaves were falling across the camera as well. It's like, if I can do this, it'll still set the mood enough and disguise it enough that you won't even question the fact that all the trees are green in October in Illinois.
Oh my gosh. My brain just went, why was it important for it to be fall? Sometimes I have thoughts and I shouldn't vocalize them. I should have just let my brain work that one out by itself.
Yeah, I think my favorite things about Halloween, my two favorite things are actually running a little bit low on time. I love that opening shot where it follows Michael's perspective. I love that because they only had limited time with children actors. All the hands in that are apparently Deborah Hill's hands, the co-screenwriter, because she was deemed to have small enough hands that it would look good enough.
Yeah, those look like children's
Yeah,
hands.
it's three shots stitched together. It's incredible. It's inspired by a lot of like older noir, the long opening shots of those styles of movies. John Carpenter thought that would be cool to do in a horror movie. A lot of those are tracking dolly shots. But the problem with that is you need to lay tracks down to establish that. You can't lay tracks down while you're trying to walk through a house. So they ended up purchasing a brand new camera that I can't remember off the top of my head what the camera was, and using a Steadicam instead, and I think it works really well. And then I think I love the final shots as well, which is shots of nothing, but the insinuation of Michael Myers isn't dead, he's still out there, he could be anywhere. And that, I think that really, those two scenes I think are what make this movie for me.
I can
Just
see that.
a really strong opening and a finale that puts it right in your homes. Like, he could be anywhere. He could be down
Right
the block
outside
from
your
you.
house.
Yeah. So yeah, without, I guess if you guys don't have any more closing thoughts, want to move on to City of God? Or
I think that it should have ended with like the Hulk ending scene with him just like hitchhiking as he walks down the street.
it's like, ooh, I gotta get out of here.
Yeah, someone pitched that for the next Halloween movie.
No, the last one was called Halloween Ends. We got
There's a Halloween every year.
what happens in Halloween Ends? There's something about a band kid being a bully, or the main character gets bullied by a band kid. Look, his name was...
There's not a band kid out there bullying people.
Look, his name was Corey, and it was weird, and I don't remember much more about it. There's not a whole lot of Michael Myers or Jamie Lee Curtis in the last Halloween.
This is a stretch, but I feel like somewhere along Jason's backstory there wasn't Corey, so maybe that's an Easter egg tie-in.
Maybe. I don't think that Halloween Ends thought that hard about anything.
They don't need a like subtle tie-in. They had. Oh no, that was Freddy versus. Sorry, I'm gonna back out of this one.
That's what we really need. We need a Freddy versus Jason versus Michael Myers
Yeah.
to make up for the Terminator
Also,
versus
the
RoboCop
Babadook
movie
is
I
here.
never got to see. Yeah, and also the Babadook shows up for some reason. I would watch it. I'd be there
I
opening
would watch
night.
the hell out of it. I'd probably laugh the whole time.
But I don't need the Babadook to fight any of them. I just need him to
No,
be
he's just
standing
there. Yeah.
It's like that bit in Community. It might not even be Community. It might just be Donald Glover's stand-up, where he's talking about the weird dreams he has, and he says, "My father was there. I did not see him, but I knew he was there." I think it might have been a stand-up special.
Yeah, I don't think that was in Community. I could be wrong. I guess I'll just have to rewatch it. Oh no.
Not the worst decision we've ever made.
I think the worst decision we've ever made is not watching The Sopranos.
We're gonna get there. Okay. Problem is we're trying to watch it as a family, and we're a little bit disorganized. Our Sopranos review will be coming around the time this podcast
2074.
eats itself.
Or, just before the inevitable heat death of the universe.
Yeah, somewhere
Whatever
around
comes
there.
first.
Speaking of gangsters, do we want to move on to City of God?
Yes.
Nail the transition.
Don't you have a little Easter egg to do? Or you want to do that at the end?
We can do that at the end. That'll
Okay.
come at the end. So City of God, this one was seeded 54. This is actually one I pulled from IMDb's top 250, where it was ranked 25. So, I think I know the answer to this. Have you guys had any experience with City of God prior to this?
My first experience with City of God was sitting here with you fools and watching it.
Yeah, pretty much the same.
That is fair. This is a weird kind of moment. It's a very influenced movie. It was very popular in Brazil. It got nominated for a handful of Oscars, most of which it lost to Return of the King, which
What a
Okay.
what a rough year to oof.
Which, yeah, okay. Maybe if we get far enough, this will go off against Return of the King. But we'll see. We'll see. So yeah, first time viewers of City of God. I watched this movie. I remember watching this movie in my college dorm room. I don't think I've watched it since then. But it's always one that's very much stuck with me. I've always kind of had this movie in my head ever since then. And I don't think it's a movie you forget quickly. So what's your guys' take on having just recently watched this for the first time?
I thought that it was incredibly well done. Like, I was like, well, I've never heard of this movie. And I've also never seen a movie from Brazil, which I've just noticed as I'm watching. And I'm like, oh, that's really unfortunate. This is phenomenal. One of the most violent movies I can remember for a while. But it never felt like it was just doing violence for violence, which is really exhausting to me. Like, it was just like, this is what's happening. And I'm like, oh, well, that sucks. Show me more.
No, this is my first time watching this for sure. Now that I'm thinking about it in this moment, like, the vibe, at least for the intro vibe, like, it kind of gives me similarities to Slumdog Millionaire. Have you seen that movie?
Okay, yeah.
Sort of like the story of, like, coming out, not necessarily coming out on top, but like coming out to live a better life.
Yeah.
Poor
then-
kids in the slums.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this was 6 years before Slumdog Millionaire, if I recall correctly.
Okay. Yeah, and like just the chickens in the scenes in the very beginning.
That was so poignant. That was such an interesting way to tie in the entire story of the movie. And I love that they started and ended with that scene. That was really cool.
Yeah. And like I especially liked how they introduced Rocket, because for me it was just, oh, there's this dude, he's caught in a weird situation, but he's gonna get out of this and like live his life in not away from all this, but as the story goes,
Very the like cliche start your story where it ends, which is why Morty pushes that guy down the stairs in Rick and Morty. Very I bet you're wondering how I got here, but a lot cooler and better than that.
I like it when it's well done. I think it's really cool. I'm like, oh yes, cyclical nature of humans. I love it. But I also can recognize and admit that it's probably really overdone.
Overdone, but it's done really well here.
You don't start overdoing things unless they're good.
Right. I think that's kind of part of the story of this movie, though, because it's, to me, very obviously heavily influenced by directors like Scorsese and Quentin Tarantino. But as many imitators of those directors as there have been, I don't know that I've ever seen an imitator quite on this level. And in a lot of ways, it does what those two directors do, but better. I say hesitantly, but it's definitely on par.
I mean, you can look at a lot of the similarities between this and particularly Quentin Tarantino, but there's way more heart in this than there has ever been in any Quentin Tarantino movie ever. Like, there's more true human emotion that isn't just like, I'm a psychopath.
Yeah, it keeps
Which I think is really nice.
Keeps the style but drops the cynicism.
Exactly. Like, even in the worst situations that you can imagine, you're just like in the middle of a gang war where you literally could just die at any time. You're still like, but humans, pretty great.
Right.
And don't get me wrong, I love Quentin Tarantino movies, but I'm not, like, gonna trust a love story in a Quentin Tarantino movie.
That's not going very far.
You get a giant needle right in your chest.
And so much of this story I find interesting. The way they kind of developed it, it's very much like kind of going back to what we were talking about with Goodfellas last week. A lot of this was them, they had the story, it's based on a book, so they had the story, they knew where they were going, but just talking in between scenes of, oh, this is something I've experienced. Because all the actors in this, there's hardly any like career actors in this. A lot of these are just kids they pulled off the street from the City of God neighborhood in Rio. And like a very, I think, poignant scene. There's a scene where they pray right before they go to war, and that scene came out of one of the actors was like, "Hey, are we gonna have a prayer scene in this?" And the director was like, "Why?" And the kid was like, "'Cause in my gang we always pray before we go into battle." So they shot a prayer scene, and just a lot of stuff like that. A lot of the shots in this movie are designed to emulate real life photos from this time period and this event that actually happened.
That's really cool. I didn't know that, but it does make sense because a lot of the scenes are so well shot and captured that it does look like there's art there. There's like actual art there, and I think that's, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure part of it's just the gorgeous setting that is Brazil, but whoever was behind that camera and whoever edited it, absolutely masterful.
And the interactions, like, they feel genuine. Like, I know that it's, like, for the people that are acting, it's their job, but, like,
right.
You know you're watching a movie, but at the same time, it doesn't feel like a movie. It just feels like a point in time that you get to watch.
Right. And there's a lot of really talented little kids.
I want to know what they did to that kid that got shot in the foot. Little kids don't cry like that for no reason.
Right? He's like, no, I'll cry. Incredible.
Yeah. It was kind of funny. The guy that plays Lil Z or Lil Dice, Leandro Firmino. I'm so sorry if I'm butchering that name because I almost definitely am. He had no ambition of being in this movie. He was just with a buddy who was auditioning. He's like, yeah, I'll go and hang out, so you're a little bit less anxious. And he ended up with the part of Lil Z, and just like a lot of weird stories about them just pulling people off the streets.
Dude, I don't know that this movie would have worked without him. Oh, yeah. Like, his intensity? Oh, my gosh. Like, so what good. A great villain.
Yeah. Lil Z is one of my favorite villains. He's definitely, I would say, top 10 for me.
Even him as a little kid.
Yeah.
That was so intense.
Yeah, in particular, that hotel scene. And I like the way, like, and again, this is kind of imitating Tarantino, but not just for style points. It ends up having a point where that hotel scene, when you initially see all the bodies, you're like, what the hell happened here? Like, the cops do it, what happened to Little Dice? Like, creates a lot of questions. And then to reveal that, oh, it was the little kid. Like, it's that Tarantino style of telling things out of order, but actually with a point to it, which I think a lot of imitators miss. Actually using it to craft the story better instead of just using it because it's a cool device.
Right. Also, all the interpersonal relationships, like the fact that Benny's death was really, or I guess Benny being alive was really the only reason that this psychopath was not completely going off the deep end in the first place. Like, that was his tether to humanity.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it was just really, really rich and really intricate and done really well, and I really appreciate the details that it puts in, because it does do the freeze frame almost, sort of, and then like, let me explain this part.
Yeah.
And yeah, you can definitely see the influence there, but not in a bad way or even a cheesy way.
Before I get to knock on Ned, I gotta tell you about the Tinder trio.
Yeah.
And like, for Little Dice, like, they got us with, as far as I can recall, 2 twists with it. One for the first with the hotel scene, the second time with Rocket's brother, because you're initially made to believe that he got out. He got money and he got out.
Mm-hmm.
I do have a question, though. Do you remember when he was seeing that old man in the wheelchair? I don't know if he was like some sort of religious practitioner, and he gave him that necklace and said, if you fornicate with this on, you'll die.
Yes.
Did he have the necklace on in the scene where
he
did.
Was
Yeah,
because the only shot of that sequence is of his chest, and he's wearing the necklace.
I looked away.
Yeah, and I think like
that makes it no.
I was fair. I was having this conversation with one of our roommates, Angie, who may pop into the podcast from time to time, about Midnight Cowboy and kind of depicting graphic sexual assault, and how a lot of times it's not necessary and it just kind of perpetuates cycles. Midnight Cowboy gets a little bit of a break from this because it was the first movie to do it, and it proves a poignant thing with Joe Buck's trauma in that. But I appreciate that in City of God, it has the one shot of Lil Dice's chest, Lil Z's chest, shows him wearing the necklace. He gets one line in there, and then it moves on from it. Like, you get it, you understand what happened, you understand that it's terrible, but you don't have to see the graphic.
I didn't necessarily have to look away, but I knew it was
Yeah.
coming, and I did not want to see.
Right. Yeah, so I think City of God approaches that really well. And just then going into Knockout Ned's story from there, what a compelling character from just introduction to finish as far
Right.
as Knockout Ned.
Dude, and he came in well into half over of the movie and just like took over my entire brain space, which is so telling of how interesting of a character that he is. And I keep saying character, but like he was a real person. They showed
Right.
the footage of him being interviewed after the hospital, and it was the same exact footage that was used in the movie.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is a real dude.
I think that gets into kind of the structure of this movie and why it's done so well, because I think Benny hooks you for a lot of the first half. You keep watching because of Benny.
Yeah.
And then when he dies, it's like, oh, that's like, I personally, Benny's death hits the hardest of all the deaths in this for me. And after him, it's a little bit like, oh no, Lil Z's gone off the deep end, but why do I keep watching? And then Knockout Ned gets reintroduced, and it's like, now I'm investing in Knockout Ned because Benny, it kind of fills that void that Benny has created in a lot of ways of the character you're rooting for the most besides Rocket.
Well, yeah, you're rooting for Rocket, but at no point in time did I think that Rocket could carry the story by himself.
No.
Like, I loved him. He was really good, and he was excellent at being used to explain the whole you're stuck between either the monster eats you or, you catch the monster.
Mm-hmm.
And fantastic use of storytelling elements. But I don't think that he was compelling enough to be the main focal point for the entire movie.
Yeah.
And then here comes Knockout Ned, and I'm like, oh, okay, I'm back in.
Right.
Oh my gosh.
I love the sequence of Rocket where he is gonna try and rob someone so he can get money for a camera. Like, honestly, a pretty noble reason to commit a crime. And he just is going around, I was like, oh no, that person was too cool. Oh no, she flirted with me. I can't
So
do that.
nice.
Just like too nice for his own good. And thankfully it ends up working out for him. But yeah, I wrote down the line he has right off the bat before it cuts to the beginning when he's about to grab the chicken. He says in the narration, a picture could change your life, but if you run, they get you. If you stay, they get you too. I think that's the message of this movie.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
The thesis statement of this movie. if you will.
Right. In this essay, I will.
But I think, I don't know how much you want to go beyond the scope of this movie. I think that is still very much the case. I think that is kind of still the point of this movie. The fact that they could not film in the actual neighborhood of City of God because it was still too dangerous in 2001, 2002 when they were filming this. So they filmed in the neighborhood adjacent to it. And looking into it a little bit, to this day, City of God is still one of, if not the most dangerous neighborhood in Rio de Janeiro. I feel like gangster movies are going to come up a lot, but this is one of the more interesting ones. I love the line, I think Lil Z says, Godfather my ass, that I baptize your kids.
Like I said last time, I love gangster movies, but at no point in the time in this movie was it ever romanticized. So I'm like, I don't want this one. I just want to look cool in a suit and eat cannolis or whatever it is.
Well, that's kind of odd. Granted, it's really hot in Brazil, I imagine. Never personally been. But, yeah, no one in this movie ever puts on nice clothes, I don't think. Maybe Rocket?
Tiago?
Benny puts on nice clothes.
Benny,
yeah.
That Tiago buys for him.
But you can tell their priorities are completely different.
Yeah.
Except for Benny, who's like, I just want to be chill and cool and have a good time.
Coolest
And I'm like,
guy in
valid. Everybody else is like, I would like to live.
Yeah.
Yeah, when Tiago and Benny started interacting, my first thought was, is this a little love story?
I got that too.
Yeah, but just like how Benny is like a capybara and it can hang out with anybody.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, like
I was like, maybe everybody has chemistry with Benny.
it really in fact does, because like what there was what Catholics, I think the Christians, and I think another religious denominations. So the fact that he got religious people to hang out where people most likely are drinking, doing
and
drugs,
selling drugs.
yeah, like how everybody came together just for Benny. That
Which
is
is just a testament to how well this character is cast. Like, the actor did so good at convincing us all that he is the coolest person on the planet, and then they're like, he's the coolest person on the planet, and we're like, oh, we know.
Yeah, and even the kid that ends up killing Benny goes to Carrot and it's like, I was trying to kill Lil Z. I need protection because I accidentally killed Benny. And Carrot is immediately like, you killed Benny. Like, you have no home here. And shoots him.
Right?
I think the line was, you killed the coolest gangster.
And and the only reason that Carrot was originally letting, like, that it hadn't evolved to a full-out turf war in the first place is because of how cool Carrot and Benny were.
Yeah, because one of the last conversations Benny and Little Z have is Benny tells Little Z, don't bother going after Carrot. He's a good guy. Just leave it alone. You have enough territory. And then he dies right after that. And Little Z's like, maybe I won't.
Yep. Like, it's an interesting progression that, aside from Rocket, Benny really is a keystone character. And then when it comes down to knock out Ned, his characterization is, I still have my morals, but he ends up dying while losing those morals as compared to Benny, where he still keeps them throughout the entire film.
And Knock on Ned dies because he loses his morals, I would argue.
Yeah.
His
he wouldn't
one
have
rule-
shot that guy's dad if he was like, no innocence.
His one rule was no innocence, and the moment he breaks that is the moment he seals his death.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. That's why you gotta end the bloodline.
Always got to end. That is the real message of City of God, if there even is one. Machiavellian in the bloodline. No man left behind, as in no witnesses.
No man left alive.
We'll get into this, but the line from Lawrence of Arabia, no prisoners.
Oh, we have to watch Lawrence of Arabia?
Yeah, look, man.
Can we split it into two?
Look, this is a spoiler, but hopefully by the time we actually get to this, I think it's far enough down that people forget this. It's on this. It's paired with Shawshank Redemption.
Oh my!
When I saw that, I was like, "That is
a movie for 12 hours.
7 hours, almost 8." We'll
Lawrence
get through
of Arabia is so long,
Never
and it's a
seen it.
lot of shots of him in the desert. It's like walking across the desert.
Oh, just like Dune.
I mean, yeah, that's fair.
Look, we
I
can get
do
into
watch
this a little
Dune.
bit later.
You called you got me. I do watch movies of people just walking across the desert.
All
right.
We'll definitely get into this. I am a huge fan of Lawrence of Arabia.
I know you are.
But that's for a later episode. Yeah, I guess, we're running a little low on time, but I also want to point out, I love the subtle things in City of God. And particularly one of my favorite subtle things, going into the last battle, like the focus is that chicken, but there are several shots of Little Z's men cutting up carrots. And I just love little kind of details of stuff like that. It's like, going into the last battle, they're cutting up carrots because they're going to go try and kill Carrot.
Right. And there's a couple of shots of just the runts kind of running around doing stuff. And like the way that they get him in the end, you can't tell me that wasn't planned by those little psychos.
No.
Like they were like,
waiting
you
for that
hurt my
moment.
friend. We gotta wait your turn.
Again, in the bloodline.
Yeah.
Kill all the little kids.
No, the little kids are running the city now. Like
I also
there's
wonder.
no upper bloodline. There's only the.
I also
the
wonder
bottom.
how much, on the note of the runts, Lil Z gets credit in this movie for getting crime under control because he gets control of the little runs. So now there's less like petty crime happening, and people like Lil Z because they're like, oh, it's fine, he sells coke, but at least my store's not getting robbed every other day. But I wonder how much of that, as much as Lil Z is the front man, actually is because of Benny. Mm-hmm. That feels more like
Right.
a Benny contribution.
Well, see, that's the thing. Lil Z is never really seen as a planner. He's just like, I'm going to show up and kill these people.
Mm-hmm.
And if you question me, I kill you. And if you do it this way, I'll kill you. And that's how I'm going to establish everything. I think a lot of his kind of empire and the empire that he wanted kind of went to shit without Benny's help.
Yeah.
There was one scene that sort of implied Little Zay was doing something and not being like a front man or being out of the streets, is when Benny comes by with his new hair color and new clothes, and you see Little Z at the end of the table, like in the leadership role, while everybody else, I think they were either counting money or like dicing up some coke. So I think like that's the only, yeah, I think that's like the only time you see Little Z in sort of that behind the scenes role where he is planning something.
Yeah.
I have no doubt that he like barks orders and like wants certain things, but I think, and this is a stretch considering how little I truly know these characters, but a part of, oh goodness, now I just completely blanked. A part of antisocial personality disorder is being unable to form future plans and like struggling to make judgment calls like that. So I just think that it's really nice continuation of character to like show that.
Yeah. And I think a complete lack of plan, and ultimately kind of what gets him killed, is he kicks that gun dealer out. It's like, whatever, get out of here. With no regard. He's like, I don't want to pay for this,
Yeah, he doesn't
so just leave.
comprehend consequences.
And, yeah, no comprehension of the suppliers will come for you. And they do.
The suppliers care a lot more than what happens in, like a tiny part of this one city.
Yeah.
And everybody who did something very bad ends up dying unless you're the cops.
That's the real point of the story. If you want to get away with crime completely, be a cop.
I do like the ambiguity that it's never really stated whether or not Rocket prints the photos of the cops, gets them developed. I think because he has that fear.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it came out because like the movie got made, so like,
Oh, yeah.
But like, how long did he have to keep down the
right?
Right. Yeah. So I guess going on. How are you guys feeling?
I think that if I take away the bias that is how important Halloween is and its contributions to horror movies and like being a stepping stone towards what we have now, and just take it for what it is, City of God's a way better movie. Way better.
Yeah, I'm still difficult how to really see both of these movies, Halloween and City of God, in the same bracket, because they're just so
Compare
far.
the apples and the oranges, Af.
I know.
Compare them. They're
I
both
know.
fruits.
I know. So Halloween, it's a very good movie. Love what it did for the horror genre. Have to go with the City of God. If for any specific reasons, it's because of the chicken. Because there was a snapshot of the chicken looking really surprised when another chicken got dumped into a pot, and I really love that.
The chicken was an incredible actor. I
hope they paid him all the money. I am kind of with you on this one, Ken. I have a hard time separating Halloween from the influence of Halloween. But yeah, at the end of the day, I mean, I am nervous John Carpenter's not going to make it out of this first round.
Oh no!
But I have to
What is
agree.
it called? His Artor?
A tour ship? A tour ship.
His Artorsha didn't even make it out of round one. I really like John Carpenter.
We have one more John Carpenter. I'm not going to get into what it is yet. We got one more John Carpenter. We'll see how it
Is
does.
it The People Under the Stairs?
Absolutely. I don't think I've seen The People Under the Stairs.
It's. We'll talk about it later.
Okay. Maybe a piece coming on The People Under the Stairs. Where it's just Ken talking about it. And Alf and I will sit here and
I'm gonna
watch.
do my own podcast where I just talk about the lore of the polar bears and crime family of Zootopia.
Oh, okay. That is also a piece we do.
Who are you voting for?
It's City of God.
City of God. It is unanimous.
Yeah, I had
Woo.
some doubts going into this about which way I was going to go, but City of God, the 2 times I've watched it now, has just floored me both times.
I think that since it's a true story, we should not decide who should be the real person in a Muppet remake. We should do Halloween instead.
That is
Just to be respectful.
Fair. Yeah, I wonder how much we'll get in. Yeah, because it's hard because they're all people that they pulled actually off the streets.
Yeah.
Although I will say, and we could leave it at this, I think I could watch one where Lil Z is the only human. And he's just killing a bunch of Muppets.
That's the plot of that other movie with Muppets in it. They're just puppets. I guess they're just puppets if they're not the Muppets, huh?
Yeah.
I mean, since Jaden went out and did his Muppet choice, I feel like I have to.
Fine, go.
Tiago, because he's coked out of his mind all the time.
Now, see, if we were doing Sesame Street, like you've suggested, Tiago would be a great cookie monster. An excellent cookie monster. Just face in the powder. I love cookies.
I also have to bring it up. I thought Tiago the whole entire time looked a little bit too much like Timothée Chalamet.
Dude, he did!
Just looks like a Ginger Chalamet. Always tying it into Dune.
Ugh,
But a more important tie-in is our Batman connection for this week. Actually found by Ken.
It was me.
In 2019, John Carpenter wrote a Joker comic for DC's Year of the Villain event, and it is reportedly disturbing.
Even the
Not
people on
actually
Reddit called it disturbing.
My
And I was
bad.
in the Batman subreddit.
Like,
Yeah.
more disturbing than the Killing Joke?
Yeah.
Oh.
I was like, holy crap, really? Are we allowed to
Yes.
cuss on this podcast?
Yeah.
I feel like I have cussed on this
We've
podcast.
cussed quite a bit.
I cuss a lot. I was like, holy shit, dude. Even the Reddit guys are like, yeah, it's disturbing. And I'm like, well,
Fascinating. My
Better send this to
comic
Jaden.
knowledge kind of drops off after 2016, but maybe I'll have to...
is that maybe because you're very young? Oh, not before 2006.
Yeah.
Never
No,
mind.
I got before
I am
2016.
like 0 for 0 today on this podcast.
I got before 2016. After 2016 is where I start to know a little bit less. But yeah, I think that's gonna do it. City of God is moving on unanimously.
So we have Fury Road, The Goodfellas, and City of God so far.
You know, I will say, depending on how we approach this in the future and if it goes far enough, City of God and Goodfellas would be an interesting comparison.
They would be a fun movie night.
Yeah. Well,
And by fun, I mean
fun is strong.
compelling.
Yeah.
I don't know that we'd have fun.
Do we still want to do the Halloween version?
Okay, I'll do a Halloween Muppets out of respect for the influence of Halloween, and I could see the Muppets trying for a Halloween remake.
I think that it should be all of them Muppets except one background character that's never like like the kid.
Maybe the kid. I could see Dr. Loomis being the one human character, and he's particularly as portrayed by Donald Pleasance.
Oh yeah, nothing about the character changes.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
just Muppets.
Yeah.
I feel like that could either really, really increase the danger you feel or really decrease it. Because if I was chased by a Muppet in a mask, I would be quite concerned.
Yeah.
My choice is, I forget his name, but the blonde dude with glasses who gets pinned into the wall with a knife.
Oh, I want to say his name's Brad, but
Yeah.
I'm sure I'm thinking of something else.
I want him to be the only human. Because I just want to see a Muppet lift a regular human dude up.
Or the sheriff's daughter.
Yeah, she
Like
kind of
Annie?
deserves it.
Anne? Yeah.
She's the only human.
I can see that too. Just one random teenager hanging out with the
Yeah.
Muppets that
And
dies
she's just
early
like,
on.
Dad! And it's this fucking Muppet sheriff. It's Fozzie Bear.
Oh yeah, Fozzie Bear is Michael Myers. Beyond a doubt.
Oh.
In the mask
I
and
think
everything.
Kermit should be Michael Myers.
It's fair, that's fair. Who are you putting as Laurie Strode then? Who's Michael Myers' final girl from the Final Muppet? Fonzie Bear, Michael Myers' final Muppet. I
I
found
think it should be the rock star lady with the long hair.
Done and done.
Yeah.
And join us next week. I think that's all we have time for. But join us next week where we will reveal the name of the blonde-haired Muppet lady, and we will also be going back in time for some silent movies where we're going to be watching Intolerance and Modern Times. So join us next week as we go back towards more of Hollywood's inception. Thanks for making it this far through all the Muppet shenanigans, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.